those who voted no to the referendum last year. Now, while she wasn't absolute in saying it about every no voter, we can pretty easily see what the current candidate, potential Member of Parliament, says about an electorate that voted 56% no. I feel so many heavy emotions because of the display of what I can only describe as the worst of white privilege in the country. Dunkley voted 56% no. The candidate who, at that point in time, didn't think they were going to be a candidate for Parliament was just mouthing off with the minority of the country because they didn't like what the majority of the country did. That person is now trying to win the votes of an electorate that voted 56% in the fashion that she didn't want to. Did they display a white privilege? I can't ask her that question because, of course, she's not here. Perhaps another reason why the Labor Party is not here tonight and their preference buddies, the Greens, is because a new opinion poll popped up today, and it is the first to show the Liberal Party potentially winning this seat on Saturday. Now, this poll was put out by the YouGov people, and they were able to show that the Liberal Party on two-party preferred is currently leading 51 to 49. Now, this is different than other polls which have been around a bit earlier in the campaign that suggest that Labor would hold on to the seat. How big a margin? Well, of course, we'll all learn about that together. But it also comes on a day, as we discussed last night on the show, where the great assumption of the wankers in Canberra and the bubble within the bubble that is the media that talks about politics is that something magically changed for the Prime Minister and his government because they decided to move around who did and who didn't get this much or that much of a tax cut. In fact, even left-leaning polls are saying there is no bounce. There is no bounce after that decision. There's no bounce after the endless personal news that's been around when it comes to the Prime Minister. There's no bounce about whether he goes to someone more famous than him when it comes to a concert. We also see now that in News poll, again, no great change. Now, amazingly, David Crowe, the bloke who is to spinning in the media what Murpharoo is to spinning for the Prime Minister inside the office now, David Crowe from Channel 9. Well, he said this about the Prime Minister's plight in the polls. Anthony Albanese has been spending hours in radio and television studios trying to build a stronger bond with millions of Australians, only to hear a deafening silence instead of a roar of applause. And our mate Stephen Conroy, who will be here along with Rita Panahi and with Steve Price a little bit later in the show, well, we had a long conversation on air, and you remember this, about, again, the gulf between how the bubble deals with issues and how things go down in the real world. Because there was this number that came out from the Essential organisation, which showed 52% of Australians, half of the country, literally knows hardly anything or nothing at all about the changes to tax cuts, which, of course, is why the Prime Minister is planning to spend $40 million of your money on ads to tell everyone how amazing the tax cuts are. Well, for the people in Dunkley, can I tell you what the tax cuts are? The mean wage in this seat is $42,000. The weekly tax cut is $14 a week. Now, in the real world, people get paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly, and that's the reality of, in my view, the too little, too late tax cuts. The things that, in my view, prove there is no real understanding about cost of living. And despite the briefings that were made to Labor MPs via caucus, that this was the, and I quote, solution to cost of living, $15 a week if you're on $45,000, $22 a week on $60,000, $32, and then let's make it a month, $120 a month if you're on $100,000. Can I just ask this room of people, is $14 a week going to be enough to pay your bills? Do you get a sense that $15? Can I hear a $22? Can I hear a $44? That, of course, is part of the problem for the Prime Minister here, which is the bubble has made it seem like it was a slam dunk. Big decision, big win. Reality, half of people don't know. So it's up to the reality of what's going to turn up after the 1st of July in the 15th on their bank account. And the reality is that if it's $14 a week, you're not going to notice. And even the people on $100,000 are not going to notice $120 difference. Also, about the economy and cost of living, which is the number one issue in this election, as it will be in state elections, as it will be in a federal election, whenever that is to be. I want you to pay attention to a person representing the organisation called Judo Bank. They were on with Ross Greenwood this afternoon. Because again, the Canberra bubble and the bubble within the bubble will tell us inflation, all good, all done, cost of living, not a problem, it's all getting better. Well, have a listen very carefully to what he has to say about why the reality is nothing's changed since last year.
Calling for a rate hike probably in June. It won't happen quickly, but they may get dragged back into another 50 to 100 points of rate hikes.
50 points. Remember, the general way these things go is 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25 to get to 1%. He thinks it could end up being 2 of those interest rate rises, or if they do it at the same pace, it could be another 4 of those interest rate rises because the costs to companies have not changed. The Prime Minister may desperately want cost of living to have gone away, to have changed, but the practical reality for people, especially in places like Dunkley, that's about as normal Australia as it gets, well, this again is part of the political equation that we go into when it comes to Saturday. And also, if there was about to be another 1% increase or 0.25 increases over the next few months, well, of course, that's going to add to the total amount of money that you've already had to find after a dozen interest rate rises, the elbow dozen of interest rate rises that have been there since he became Prime Minister. And the sky was falling in when it was one interest rate rise under the last mob, who, of course, got turfed. Well, what should happen when there's been 12? Well, of course, they've rigged the Reserve Bank so they won't make that decision again. Well, here is the truth. In Dunkley, 41% of all of the houses, all of the properties, all of the units, everything you can see around here is currently being paid off with a mortgage. That's 6% higher than the national average. Put simply, more people are paying off a mortgage here than in other parts of the country, many parts of the country. And right now, if you have a $500,000 mortgage, you've had to find an extra $14,500 compared to what you were paying before this current mob became the government. Most people are in and around $750,000. So where did $21,000 come from? Does $14 a week fix a $21,000 problem? Now, I was garbage at maths at school, as dumb as a brick in any of those houses. But I can work out there's a lot of 14s you're going to add together to get to $29,000 that somebody on a $1 million loan is having to find to pay as a result of interest rates. That suggestion is that even if the Reserve Bank slowly started to cut things, it wouldn't be this year at all. And it might be halfway through next year. And even then, you'll still be paying 75% of the extra since this government came to power. So again, the bubble has its view. Pub test, I think, may have another. We see what happens when it comes to Dunkley in a couple of minutes' time. But let's just focus in on something we can all agree on. Greens have no idea what they're doing. Now, a perfect example of this, as we've seen before, is that they want to introduce new super profit taxes on businesses that have a turnover of $100 million or more. Now, remember, turnover is not profit. Turnover is the amount of money that comes into your business, but of course, the cost of doing your business. If you have money left over, that's what's profit. But the Greens say you should be taxed for what comes into the till as opposed to anything you need to do with the money that is in there. Well, interestingly as well, they want to move to a position where it's 100% net zero within 10 years' time. Think of all of the changes that come with that. On top of that, the Greens have come up with a spectacular idea today, which is that they would like to put a tax that will raise between $1.2 and $1.7 billion on the banks of Australia. They think they've found some fine print in the laws that were in and around the GST from a generation ago that means states are able to keep some of the taxes going that we were promised were wiped away. this plan to put even further financial pressure on major business in Victoria, on top of what the state government is already currently doing when it comes to everything from property taxes to mental health levies, of course, makes it even more bizarre here. But don't forget, this is the political party that also believes that government should set the price for how much stuff is at the supermarket. These people have no idea what they're doing. So between you and I mean that to everyone in the room, I don't care what you do on Saturday, but can you put the Greens last, please? Just put them last. We don't need that crazy anywhere. Meantime, an interesting fight that is happening in and around, to be honest. I put too much stock into all of this when left takes on left, but apparently there's a big fight coming in the Senate when the people who the government need to pass anything through the parliament, which is, of course, the Greens, as well as old doormat Dave Pocock, well, the housing policy and the next version of that, which is about to be discussed by the Senate, the Greens are saying that they're not at all planning on passing it at this stage unless there's major changes to negative gearing. This is noise, nothing will happen. However, if the government wants to play with negative gearing because they think the tax cuts that half the country have no idea about, and when they finally learn will go, $14 in Dunkley, they may well end up walking away from any idea that the Greens would need there. But there is one other fight that's worth watching here, which could see the Greens getting more power, particularly in the south coast of New South Wales. You see, this is a map of areas from Wollongong and down in New South Wales where there's planned for offshore wind farms. Now, despite the fact that they demand we must be net zero by in the next 10 years, the idea of ruining the planet to save the atmosphere may run into a few problems, with apparently angry voters who have long-term voted Labor in that part of Australia now planning to maybe go all the way to Green, or potentially jumping into an area where they could end up voting for local independence. Now, I predict this could be a problem for the Labor Party into the future. Remember, this next election is not about whether the Liberals gain power or not. The Teals is too tough a block. It's about majority government for Labor or minority government for Labor. And Labor only has a couple of seats as its majority, hence why what's going to happen here in Dunkley matters as a forerunner for what happens at a federal election, either towards the end of this year or, as the Prime Minister tells us, and we can trust his word, right, that it will be next year. Well, apparently, independence may well be the place where a lot of Labor voters may end up going, particularly in Western Sydney. Watch this space, particularly at not this election, but the next election, when there'll be 24-hour noise over Western Sydney that often votes Labor. But of course, the good dears who live in Albo's electorate, well, they get to have a curfew, don't they? Now, finally, I want to talk about America and American politics here, because on the weekend, the CPAC convention took place. This is the most MAGA of MAGA events, where, among other things, President of Argentina got to hug the potential future and beloved former President of America. Have a look at this for an outsider's wet dream. Have a look.
President! Oh, permit you. It's a very big pleasure to know you. It's an honor for me. Thank you for the work for me. I'm very happy. You are very generous to me. Thank you very much. It's a very big pleasure. You are doing a great job.
He looks so comfortable, doesn't he, as he's being... I'm not a hugger. I'm Trump. I'm not a hugger. But anyway, an Argentinian cuddle came his way. But of course, it doesn't matter because Russia's interfering in everything.
There is a history here in presidential elections by the Russian Federation, by its intelligence services, and there's plenty of reason to be concerned. And this is not about politics. This is about national security. It is about a foreign country, a foreign adversary seeking to manipulate the politics and democracy of the United States of America.
And finally, I hope you've had your dinner. If not, get ready for it all to come up at once, because according to a new book that is all about Jill Biden, the First Lady, the President of the United States says a healthy sex life is a key to a good marriage. So all the time we've been watching the leader of the free world falling down, falling up the steps, thinking, what a klutz, what a fool, what is he doing? Whereas when Jill sees it, this is what she's thinking.